The last section in Chapter 1 is perimeter, circumference, and area. So perimeter is the sum of the lengths of all its sides. So that means you want to always add up the sides. So when I'm talking about the perimeter of my yard, I have a fence, so I'm going to add up all the lengths of those fences. The area is all of the space inside of there. So for example, if this is my shape, my perimeter is always going through the outside, but my area is always going to be how much I can fill up this whole square with a piece of carpet. So making sure you kind of know the difference. So perimeter wise, I wouldn't take the time to memorize those formulas. Just know that you're adding up all the sides. Okay? Now for area, you want to know for a square that it's always going to be length times width or base times height. For a triangle, it's going to be a half times base times height, or base times height divided by 2, depending on which one you like to use. And then for a rectangle, it's going to be the same that we already used for a square. So square and a rectangle should be using the same one. Now a circle, that's the one where you have to know the perimeter formula, because perimeter is not called the same thing for a circle. It's called circumference because it has no vertices. So it's either pi times diameter or 2 pi r depending on what they give to you. And then for the area, I have pi times radius squared. So just make sure that you take notes of those formulas because we're going to use those today. So here's my first question. The Botany Club members are designing a rectangular garden for the courtyard of your school. They plan to place edging on the outside of the path. How much edging material will they need? So here is my picture, and notice that you have that 4 feet all the way around. So when they're putting that edging, they're wanting to know what's going to be my perimeter. Well, the problem is that you have dimensions for the inside rectangle, but you don't have dimensions for the outside rectangle. So I know that from here to here they said that's 4. I also know that happens all the way around. So from there to there it's 4. So if I add this 4 and this 4 to my original length that I have, I'm going to be adding an additional 8 feet to the 22, which is why the length of that whole square or rectangle is 30. I need to do the same thing on this side. From here to here is an additional 4 feet, and I already know that inside this rectangle is 16, so I have to add 4 plus 16 plus this 4 to get this whole length, which is why it's 24. So if I'm going to find the edging material, I would end up just adding all the way around. So add 24 and 24, and then add 30 and 30, and then I would end up with my answer of 108 feet. Now, we do need to have labels because if we're doing story problems, we need to make sure we know what we're referring to. Alright, pause the video and see if you can do the got a question. So in the got a question, it told you you had a 5 by 7 inch picture and you're with a 1 inch wide frame. So I went ahead and drew my picture out so that I could see what it looked like. The first question asked what's just the perimeter of the picture. So that would just be adding 5 plus 5 plus 7 plus 7. So you should be getting 24 inches for that. Now it wants the perimeter of the outside frame. So here's where you have to add on those additional inches from the frame. So my width is 5, but I have to add on an inch to both sides. So that's how I end up getting 7. Same thing can be said for my length. I have 7 inches for my length, but I have to add on an additional inch to both sides, so I get 9. So you would want to add 7 and 7 and add 9 and 9, and you'll end up getting that 32 inches. Okay, then on the second page we're going to find circumference. Now they have 2 different ways we're going to end up finding that circumference. For the circumference, you can find it in terms of pi, or you can write it in terms of a decimal. So on this first one, we have 15 inches as my diameter. I know it's my diameter because it goes from one edge through the center and connects to another edge. So since it's giving me diameter, I'm going to use this formula here. So all I have to do is, if I leave my answer in terms of pi, I just put in the 15 where I see the diameter symbol, and then the pi symbol stays as is, so I don't do any calculating whatsoever. If I'm going to change it to a decimal, that's where I need to get my calculator out and type in the pi button. So here is where I would do 15 times the actual pi button on your calculator. So you should be looking for that pi button, and it should be about here. So I would just be typing in 15 times pi and then rounding my decimal. So you should be getting 47.1 and then inches on both of those. Okay, let's try another one. So on the next one, notice that we only have a radius. So the radius goes from the center to an edge. So now I know I'm going to be using the second equation. So now I'm going to multiply 2 times pi times radius. So I'm going to be doing 2 times pi times my radius is 4. Now we are going to simplify, so we're going to multiply these whole numbers and get this 8. Since it wants it in terms of pi, I leave that as a symbol. Then over here is where you type it in your calculator. So now I would do 2 times pi times 4 and get the 25.1. Both of them you still have labels. Alright, pause the video and see if you can do the got a question. So in the got a questions we have, what's the circumference of the circle with a radius of 24 meters in terms of pi? So I would be using the circumference formula with a radius. So 24 times 2, and then in terms of pi means I leave the symbol. So I would have 48 pi and then a label of meters. The next one asks for what would it be if you rounded. So now is where I use my calculator and I do 48 times the pi button, and I would get 150.8 meters. Okay, next question. What's the perimeter if it's off of a coordinate plane? So when they give you a coordinate plane, if I'm going to find perimeter, I need to know the lengths of all three sides. Well, if they give you horizontal and vertical lines, those are the easy ones because all you have to do is count. So I can count across. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks. So I know it's 6 units long. And then I do the same for the vertical line. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 blocks tall. So I know it's 8 units for the height. Now I can't just count this because it's not along one of those grid lines on the coordinate plane. So here's where you're going to use the distance formula that we used in the previous section. So I'm going to use this point here and this point here because those are the endpoints of the line I'm trying to find the distance of. So I'm going to plug those into my distance formula. So I get my x's, so -3 minus 3, and my y's, -2 minus 6. So then I calculate, I subtract them, and I get -6 and -8. Then I square them, 36 and 64. I add them together, I get square root of 100, and then I simplify that, which is just 10. Now I have all three sides, so now I'm going to add those 3 up to find the actual perimeter. So 10 plus 6 plus 8, and that's how I end up getting the 24 units. I write units because they don't give me a label, so I just go ahead and use the generic kind. Alright, next question here. How do I find area? So it says it gives you a rectangular banner similar to the one that you have right here. The banner is shown to have 2.5 feet wide by 5 feet high. To the nearest square yard, how much material do you need? Now, if I'm finding area of a rectangle, remember that formula was base times height. So all you should be doing is just multiplying the 2.5 times 5. So I get 12.5. However, it does say to the nearest square yard, so I would end up rounding that to 13. And since we're talking about area, this is where you change your label to doing square whatever. So in this case, square feet. Alright, last question. Finding area of a circle. Remember my area formula is pi times radius squared, and they want me to leave it in terms of pi here. So the first thing I look at is what do they give me? Well, I see a line going from endpoint through the center to an endpoint. So what they gave me is my diameter, not the radius. So how could you find the radius? Well, I just split that in half. So half of 16 would be 8. So I would plug 8 into my formula. So I would be doing pi times 8 squared to find the area, and then I just simplify. So 8 squared would be 64. And then since it wants it in terms of pi, I leave that symbol there and not multiply. They do give me a label here which is meters, so I would label it with meters squared. Okay, so in this lesson we talked about perimeter, area, and then circumference and area of a circle. If you still have questions, let me know, please.